So Jenna, I was about 8.5 months pregnant when we went to a wedding. My niece came over from England, and she had pertussis. We didn't know. She was coughing, and it was much later that we all found out that that was the origin for us, for our family, of getting whooping cough. I started coughing. My husband started coughing about 2 weeks before Jenna was born. I started coughing about a week before. She was born. My husband had been to the doctor. They thought that he had some kind of bronchial infection. Jenna started getting a runny nose when she was about 4 days old. By this point, I was coughing so hard I was incontinent. I went to the doctor, took her. The doctor still, was saying it was just a really bad cough. She said to watch Jenna. It was getting more serious for my husband. He was on antibiotics. Our son, Jack, who's 15 months old, had already had his 2, 4, and 6 month doses of vaccine for pertussis, so he had really mild symptoms. On the weekend, I guess Jenna was about a week old, and I happened to be talking to my sister on the phone, and she's a former public health nurse, and I was telling her about everything, and I coughed, and she said, that sounds like whooping cough. And she said, I think you better take Jenna and go to Emerge and get them to swab her, and for a PCR, the technical term. So off I went, and I took my friend with me, and we sat in emergency, and when we got to see a doctor, he examined Jenna, and I told him the whole story, and he was very reluctant, and he talked about how invasive it would be to put the swab in a newborn's down into her nasal passages, but luckily my friend is an old-time feminist from the 60s, and we stood strong and said we want her swabbed, and so reluctantly he swabbed her, and he was not happy about it, and he told us the results would be back in 3 days. So I went home, and over the next 2 days she started getting more serious, and she started coughing, and whenever I gave her her bottle, it would get worse, and the mucus in her throat and her passages, it would build up, and she'd have a lot of trouble breathing. And so I started propping her up, and I'd be calling doctors, and they'd say, well, try this and try this, and then she'd cough to the point where she was getting dusky looking and having trouble breathing. And so I wasn't sleeping. I had a 15-month-old at home. By the Monday morning, I had an appointment with my maternal doctor, and so I purposely brought a bottle with me and gave her the bottle in the waiting room before she went in to see the doctor. And she coughed in front of the doctor. She turned purple, and the doctor said, oh, there's something really wrong here, and expedited us into emergency at Children's Hospital. It was a terribly stressful time. But once we got into Emerge at Children's Hospital and we got a diagnosis at that point, the lab result eventually came. I think it took 3 weeks later. We were being ready to be discharged from hospital. But once we were in emergency, they were preparing, or we were waiting for a transfer to ICU. We were sitting in the emergency room. They put an IV in her arm. So we were there about 4 or 5 hours. I wasn't given any instructions about how to feed her, what to do. I was alone in the room with her, and I asked the nurse, I said, she's hungry. She said, well, just give her the bottle. So I gave her a bottle, and her passages closed up. She stopped breathing. I hit the emergency call button. The nurse came. She tried to suction her. She couldn't clear the passage. She was turning purple. She couldn't breathe. And they grabbed her. They took her down to the case room. All the lights came on. Got a doctor in. and they kept trying to suction her and clear her airway, and they couldn't. And I don't know how long it took, and they were about to intubate her, but it was the longest time in my life before they cleared her, and she started breathing again. It was a little while longer. They got her into the ICU, and from that point forward, she was tube fed. She had oxygen prongs in her nose. She had leads for all of her vital signs. And we were there for 24 hours a day. We never left her. I was pretty emotional, pretty prenatal, crazy mother kind of thing going on. Low trust for the medical system after everything I'd been through. So I wasn't going to leave her. My husband and I did 12-hour shifts. We had a 15-month-old at home, so we operated on little to no sleep. And at the time, there was a nursing shortage, which I'm sure still is going on everywhere in all the provinces in Canada. And so many of the nurses that we had never nursed an infant with whooping cough. And one of the things that we were dealing with is that whenever she'd have a cough, or not every time, but almost every time, she'd get to the end of the cough and she wouldn't have a reflex to start breathing again. So she'd have to be kind of propped up and stimulated to start breathing again. So, and we didn't know when she was going to cough, so somebody had to be there to stimulate her to get breathing again. And I certainly didn't trust that there was always going to be someone to be there. So even going for a cup of coffee was like this massive sprint to the cafeteria and back. So we had 3 weeks of that. Anyways, that was our experience with Jenna being sick. And in our case, if Jenna hadn't been in emergency, if she'd been at home with me, we could have been at home. Just by the grace of God, we were in emergency that day. She could have died. There's no way that an ambulance could have gotten there fast enough, or that she could have had her airway cleared. So if everybody stops vaccinating their children for pertussis, more and more infants will become ill. And not everybody has the resources, has the ability to get their children the medical care that they need. There will be more higher mortality rates. There will be more devastating stories.